Have you ever wondered why your brain seems determined to make you anxious? Why it imagines worst case scenarios, makes you replay embarrassing moments, and tries to convince you that catastrophe lurks around every corner? But what if your brain is not broken? What if evolution designed it to work like this? You see, your brain lies to you every day. It tries to convince you that other people are constantly judging you. It tries to convince you that catastrophes are commonplace. And it also tries to convince you that anxiety equals real danger. But here's the strange part. Your brain is doing exactly what evolution intended it to do. Most people think anxiety is a flaw and they need to get rid of it. But that's not true. It's simply a sign of an overreactive alarm system that's designed to keep you alive. Hello, I'm Dr. Sean O'Brien. I'm a psychologist, and for the last 30 years, I've helped people overcome anxiety disorders. In this video, I'm going to teach you why your brain makes you anxious, why attempts to get rid of anxiety paradoxically backfire, and why changing the way you think about anxiety will help you to overcome it once and for all. Let's start with an analogy. If you think of your brain as a smoke alarm, you have two choices. One is an alarm that's a little too sensitive. It goes off perhaps when you're toasting bread. On the other hand, the other alarm almost never goes off, including sometimes during real emergencies. Which one would you want for your family? If you're like most people, you want the alarm that's a little overly sensitive, because while a false alarm is inconvenient, it's more likely to keep you alive. On the other hand, alarm that never goes off can be deadly. Evolution did not design your brain to be perfectly accurate, and it didn't design it to make you happy. It designed it to keep you alive. And if that means it has to set off some false alarms to keep you safe, then it will do so. Imagine, for example, it's 100,000 years ago, and you're walking through the forest. You hear rustling in the leaves in the distance. If you assume it's the wind and you're wrong, you're dead. If, on the other hand, you assume it's a wild animal that can prey on you and you flee, you will survive. Our brain has developed that ability to send out false alarms because it's designed to err on the side of safety. Anxiety is not a bad thing. If anything, it's too much of a good thing. Another important thing to note is that our society has evolved much quicker than our brains have adapted. So today, that bear in the woods is more likely to be a presentation at work, an exam at school, or an upcoming blind date this weekend. Our brains respond to the uncertainty associated with these things as if it was a bear in the woods 100,000 years ago. I can illustrate how this works by recounting a story that somebody told me many years ago. It was a story told by a gentleman who had social anxiety and who was going to a party. However, his anxiety rose because he discovered that a woman that he really liked was going to be in attendance. And at one point, they were all in a group discussing some funny stories, and someone spoke about a nervous reaction they had at work. And they asked this gentleman, have you ever had a nervous reaction like that? And he went to make a funny comment by saying, I'm having a nervous reaction right now. But unfortunately, he didn't say the word reaction. He said something that sounded like reaction. And in fact, it implied that he was having an inappropriate sexual response at that moment. But he said while he was embarrassed and thought he would be kicked out of the party, nobody seemed to understand what he said, and the conversation continued. And he was relieved until he looked across the group and the woman he liked was staring him right in the eye and chuckling. And she started to laugh, which made him laugh. And eventually they were both laughing hysterically, and no one in the group had a clue why they were laughing. But he was initially so embarrassed that, there it is, that alarm was going off in his head. But some funny things happened as the party went on. The lady kept spending time with him and talking to him, and she admitted that she found him quite funny. They started dating, and a couple of years later, they were married. So you can see that his catastrophic fear was not borne out by the fact. This is what anxiety does. Anxiety predicts catastrophe. but reality is often much kinder. Many people don't truly understand why social anxiety exists from an evolutionary standpoint. But if you go back hundreds of thousands of years ago, you can understand that being cast out of our tribe had serious impact on our survival. If we were cast out of our group, we were alone in the world, and that was dangerous. And as a vestige of that, most people today are very much concerned about social rejection and acceptance. Once we understand why anxiety exists, it totally changes how we approach treatment. Many people come to see me and they say, Sean, I feel overwhelmed by anxiety and I need your help in getting rid of it. Now, I understand where that comes from because anxiety is at times overwhelming. It's a cumbersome thing to deal with. But the problem is not anxiety itself. The problem is that we perceive that anxiety represents real danger, when in fact, most times anxiety is just a false alarm. We erroneously conclude that because we feel anxious, something bad is going to happen. But as a psychologist, I routinely say, feelings are not facts. Let me illustrate this by describing another case study. It was a person I treated a few years ago, and he was a young man who had a strong history of social anxiety, but he wanted to meet nice women. Unfortunately, he was convinced that every conversation would end badly. And there goes that alarm again. However, what he said to me was, Sean, help me get over my anxiety so I can meet nice women and begin dating. Now, based on evolution, I thought that we should switch those goals. Rather than getting rid of his anxiety so he could talk to women, I told him that I was going to help him talk to women safely and successfully in order to dial down his social anxiety. And we did that. At first, we began with some small tasks to get him to open conversations and speak to people, and he slowly built up that facility to converse comfortably and effectively. And within a few short months, he began dating and he was very happy, even though he continued to experience social anxiety. What he did was he began to realize that it was just a thought or a feeling and not a genuine fact. But if anxiety is just a false alarm, why doesn't it ever go away? And the reason for that is that we unwittingly train it to remain present. When we feel anxious, what do we typically do? We avoid the thing that we think will harm us. And how do we feel when we avoid things? We feel relief. And that relief just reinforces that the initial activity was dangerous all the way along. And it also prevents us from learning that we can do it safely. It also prevents us from developing the requisite skills to deal with that form of anxiety effectively. Avoidance feels good in the moment, but every time we engage avoidance, we think, thank God we escaped that situation. It really was dangerous. We never learn that we can gently confront those situations in a safe and effective manner. Every escape just strengthens our anxiety. Imagine a child learning to ride a bicycle. If you never wobble, if you never fall, and if you never practice, are you ever going to become proficient riding a bicycle? Of course not. Confidence comes from experience. And the same thing is true with anxiety. We don't overcome anxiety by avoiding situations. We overcome anxiety by gently taking them on and developing the skills to cope with them. That's exactly what happened to the young man that I treated with social anxiety. By learning how to speak to women effectively and by taking some measured risks, he was able to turn down his sensitive alarm reaction. The same principle applies to a lot of other anxiety disorders, whether they're social anxiety, panic disorder, generalized anxiety, or post-traumatic stress. When we repeatedly avoid what we fear, we never learn that we could effectively cope with those things, and we never learn to turn down that alarm reaction. It's important to keep in mind that anxiety is not your enemy. In fact, it's one of the most remarkable survival mechanisms that have ever developed. It's just that sometimes it's too sensitive and too much of a good thing. The good news is that your brain can learn. By slowly facing your fears, you learn that you can master them and that anxiety is not needed. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be building an inventory of other videos that describe various anxiety disorders and what you can do to overcome them. So, if you would like to control your brain rather than being controlled by it, please consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good day, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.